2008 through 2014 Mercedes C300 intake manifold replacement. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing out this broken intake manifold. Before we get started, I wanted to show you the part numbers for the intake manifold, the gaskets, and the manifold itself. So these are the part numbers. I will link these all up in the description of the video. We will also need the fuel injection O-rings. I will link those up in the description also. So we're going to get started by pulling off the air cleaner assembly. So you're going to pull off the snorkels on the left and right side. We're also going to pull the front engine cover straight up and set that aside. To get the snorkels off the front, you can use a flat blade screwdriver and push the little tabs, and then you can pull the air snorkels off. So you're going to do that for both sides. When I took this one off, the snorkel came off the little snout, which is no big deal. You can press it back on. Now you can pull the fresh air inlet right here off the air cleaner. It goes to the secondary air injection pump. Pull that off, and then there's a clip at the back that you can push towards the firewall. This one was missing. After that, you can just lift the air cleaner assembly up and set it aside. So this engine is really dirty and dusty. So before I get started, I'm going to cover up the mass airflow sensor here, and then I'm going to use some compressed air, and I'm going to blow as much of this dirt and debris and dust off this engine and out of the channels here. That way, when we take the intake off, we reduce the risk of that dirt falling inside the engine. So our next step is to get this wiring harness here off the top of the intake so we can get it out. I'm going to get it started by unplugging the ignition coils. I'm using a little flat blade screwdriver and put it on this little plastic lock here on the connector, so you'll turn it and it'll flare out a little bit, and then you can press the tab, and then once you press the tab, you can pull the connector off the coils. So you can go ahead and do that for all 6 coils. Now that we got all of the coils unplugged on both left and right side of the engine, right here in the back there is a ground straps on the back of the cylinder head. We need to remove the E10 torx bolt holding it on. It's a female torx bolt. So go ahead and remove that bolt. And there's going to be the exact same bolt and ground strap on the opposite side of the engine. This one's a little bit further back on the driver's side here, on the back side of the coil here, so go ahead and remove that bolt too. Now that you got all that disconnected, we're going to go on the passenger side here, and this wire loom holder here in the back. We're going to remove the E10 torx bolt here, then we're going to follow it around. We're going to remove the bolt here, and then we're going to keep following it around. There's going to be one right there in the front. Then you'll do the exact same thing on the driver's side. You'll take the bolt off here, off the bracket, and then follow it around, remove the bolt here, and then the bolt here at the front. So if you have power tools, I recommend you use them on this job. There's a lot of fasteners on this job, and this will make it so much easier and quicker. So go ahead and remove all those bolts. This is the Milwaukee M12 that I'm using here. It's the newest version they just came out with. It's a 3/8 drive. I will link up all these tools and the parts that I'm using in this video in the description. That way, if you need to pick any of these up, or if you see something you like, you can find it there. Once you get those bolts removed, you'll start seeing slack in the wiring harness, and this is what we want to see. So now you can go ahead and unplug all the sensors here at the front. So you can just squeeze the little tabs, and then we're going to start lifting the harness up and pushing it to the side. These little tabs have the little lock catches on it too. You just flip them upwards and then you squeeze the tabs and then pull them off. You want to be careful with all these tabs. They do break easily. Also, the harness has these little metal clips that clip onto the cylinder head here. So you want to pry these off the cylinder head. And I used a little flat blade screwdriver to help push them off. So you're going to unplug all these connectors here. You don't need to worry about getting them mixed up. All the connectors are different and they only plug into whatever it's designed to plug into. So go ahead and unplug them all on the left and the right side of the engine. On the passenger side, there's a few more electrical connectors on this one, like this vacuum switch here for the secondary air injection pump check valves. So go ahead and unplug all those. And then once you get that unplugged, now you're starting to get a little bit more free play in the wiring harness here. So you can also unplug the electric pump here. So just pull the connector off on the back. There's 2 little squeeze tabs on the side. Pull that off. So once you get these unplugged on the passenger side here, we're going to move over to the driver's side and do the same thing. Just unplug all the cam sensors. And also there's that little metal tab that's holding it onto the cylinder head right here at the back. So you'll pry that off with a flat blade screwdriver right there. Once you get that all unplugged, you can start lifting the harness upwards a little bit and seeing how much slack you have and kind of looking around for anything you may have forgotten to unplug. There's also going to be one little vacuum line that we need to unplug that's on the map sensor here. So we need to pull that vacuum line off and also unplug the electrical connector. And then we can go ahead and lift the PCM here. We can lift it straight up. It says held on with rubber grommets right here. Just lift it up. And now you use a bungee cord and kind of just flip it out of our way. Now you can start removing these brackets here underneath. There's also going to be a couple torque screws in the back right here holding the wiring harness to the top of the intake. And I'm not going to unplug the computer. I'm going to leave everything plugged as much as I can plugged in. So leave the computer plugged in, and we just use the bungee cord to hold everything up and out of our way. Now I'm using the M12 new Milwaukee impact driver here. This makes really quick work of jobs like this. So we can go ahead and remove these torque screws. I believe they're T25s or T27. So you can go ahead and remove these brackets. Once you get those brackets removed, then there's going to be some screws here underneath holding the wiring harness to the top of the intake. Go ahead and remove those screws, and the 2 screws in the back here holding the wiring harness down. Now you can lift the harness up a little bit, and then you can reach around back and unplug all 6 of the fuel injectors. And you may have to come around from the side like this and get them. There's a couple electrical connectors in the very back here that you'll have to unplug. And they have those little lock tabs on too, so you'll pull them upwards, and then you can start removing those. So disconnect all of the injectors, like I said, and then any other electrical connector you start seeing around here, you go ahead and unplug them. Now if the injector's unplugged, the harness has got a lot more slack and it's starting to lift up a little higher and higher. So we're going to follow it here on the driver's side, and there's going to be one little zip tie holding the wiring harness to the fuel rail there. We need to cut that zip tie off. So right here on the fuel rail is electrical connector. We need to get it off the fuel rail. There's a little tab right here on the inside. I'm using a pick tool to push the tab, and once you get that tab pushed, then you can push or pull the connector towards the front of the car and pull it off. It was a little hard to get to the little plastic tab, but if you look back here, you can see it right back there. So you're going to flare it downwards, and once you get it flared down, then you can pull it off the little metal bracket that it's hooked onto. Now you got that electrical connector off the fuel rail, you can start pulling it up a little bit, and we need to get this vent line right here off. And to do that, I used the pick tool, and I got the pick tool inside the hose here and kind of worked it around, and that freed it up, and then it pulled the plastic line off. So if you look at it, it tees off and goes underneath to the air box here. We need to get it off right here too, so you're going to use the pick tool to loosen it up and push it off. The vent line towards the front of the valve cover goes underneath the wiring harness. You can go ahead and pull it out from under it and kind of lift it up right here like this. So now you can see we're starting to get a lot more slack in the harness here, and everything's starting to free up. So right here in the back is the brake booster vacuum hose. We need to pull that off the pump. There's 2 little squeeze tabs on the side, so you'll push those little tabs in and then pull the vacuum hose off like this, and then you can just rotate it off to the side. Now we're going to take these little metal brackets off in the back. So they're held on with some torque bolts here in the back. There's 2 on each side, so we're going to go ahead and remove those 2. To make quick work of that, I'm going to use my Milwaukee M18 fuel here that has a little bit more power for taking bigger brackets off. Once you get these 2 brackets unbolted, you can go ahead and set them aside. You want to make sure you don't get them mixed up. They are different from left and right. After that, we're going to go ahead and unplug the mass airflow sensor here in the back by squeezing the tab and then pulling it off. Then we're going to flare these little plastic tabs outwards just a little bit, and then you're going to pull it back towards the firewall and pull the mass airflow sensor off the throttle body down here. So after you get that pulled off, then we're going to take the vent line that goes to the PCV valve here and pull that off right here. This is on the back of the passenger side cylinder head here. So go ahead and pull this hose off. Once you get the hose pulled off, you can take the whole mass airflow sensor as a whole and snorkel it all and pull it out, and then you can set this aside. Now if you look right here, there's a vent line that we need to remove. It goes from the front all the way to the back, and you're just going to lift it straight up like this and kind of tuck it off to the side. You need to unbolt the throttle body here. So there's 4 bolts, torque bolts here that we need to remove. So 1 here and 1 here, and then there's going to be 1 below, and then once you get that one, there's going to be 1 right here below on the bottom here. So we're going to remove all 4 of those bolts, and then we're just going to let it rest right on top of the transmission back here. And there's plenty of room to get power tools back here to remove those fasteners. I also just left the throttle body plugged in, did not remove the connector from it. So once you get the 4 bolts off the throttle body, you can go ahead and just set it on top of the transmission and let it rest there without unplugging it. So I'm using a long bungee cord underneath the wiring harness, lifting it upwards a little bit, and then I got a shorter one pulling it back towards the firewall here. So it's lifting it up and back towards the firewall, and that's giving us a lot of clearance. So now we need to remove the fuel rail. So there's going to be 4 bolts holding the fuel rail on. So we're going to remove the 4 bolts. After that, we're going to take the pry bar and pry the injectors out of the intake. So you'll just lightly pry up like this, and the injectors will pop out of out of their little ports on the intake manifold. You'll do that on both the passenger and driver side. You want to take your time. You don't want to pry too hard. You just want to pry straight up. You don't want to pry at any weird angles or anything. Just pry it straight up, and then the injectors will pop out. And then once you get it popped out like this, now we can just lift the fuel injector rail out like this. And if you notice, we did not unplug the fuel line. We left it connected, so I have to unplug this little electrical connector to get it off. And also, it did not leak any fuel out when we did it like this. So I have it out and flipped over to the side here and out of our way. Later on, we'll remove the injector seals and change those out, and I'll walk you through that step. Now what we're going to do is unplug this vacuum line that's going over the top of the intake manifold. It's kind of in our way, so we're going to follow it up towards the front, and we're going to unplug it. So it's mounted onto a plastic little hose right here at the very front of the manifold. So we'll go ahead and use a pick tool and pull that off. After that, we can go ahead and remove all the fasteners on the intake manifold. It'll be the bigger E10 torque bolts you see, not the little tiny, the small little female torque bolts. So you're just going to remove all 5 of them. So you'll see them start here in the back, and you're going to work your way down, and then you'll do the same thing for the opposite side. And also at the very back of the intake manifold, there's a couple of electrical connectors. You're going to make sure those are all unplugged. You also need to make sure that this vacuum line for the map sensor is unplugged. I mentioned it earlier, but I forgot to take it off. And then there's going to be one little vacuum hose that's right down here, just below the air injection pump right there. You can kind of see it right there. And you're going to use needle nose pliers and pull that off, and then you can lift this intake manifold up and out of the car. So first I'm going to go ahead and pop it off right here. Now that we got the 2 vacuum hoses disconnected, now we can lift the harness up as high as we can and push it off to the sides, both on the left and right side. Now we're going to lift the intake manifold off. So as we lift this up and out, we're going to lift the front of the intake up at a higher angle and then pull it outwards. So I'll start lifting it straight up, and then once I get it coming, then I'll lift it at an angle like this, and then you can pull it right out. Now that we got the manifold out, we're going to go ahead and remove the gaskets if they're still in here. And then we're going to clean up all the ports here and make sure they're nice and clean. We're going to be careful to not knock the dirt into the intakes. Also, while we're in here, you can inspect the wiring harness for rodent damage or anything like that. The 2 knock sensors under the intake manifold there, they like to get chewed up by rodents. So if you look here, you see all the vacuum hoses going through. So you're going to make sure all that's in good shape. If you need to change any of that or repair any of that, go ahead and do that now. So on the vacuum hose here, this little plastic port's popped out of the intake manifold. So if yours looks like that, you need to pull that off the vacuum hose. It plugs onto the new port. So I wanted to show you the reason why we're changing this. This little arm right here breaks off on the intake runners in the inside of the intake. And sometimes the intake runners inside will jam and cause it to break. There's quite a few reasons why this will break, but that's the most common problem right there is this plastic arm breaks, and then you have no control of the airflow through the intake manifold. So I like to put the new manifold and the old manifold side by side, and then transfer any vacuum hoses over that may need to be transferred over. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up these ports here, and I'm going to do that by spraying brake clean or card spray on the rag here, and then wiping these all down until they're nice and clean. Just being careful not to knock that dirt into the intake ports. And also, if the throttle body back there needs to be cleaned, now is a good time to go ahead and clean the throttle body. So like I said, after cleaning those ports, I put the 2 manifolds side by side, and then this 1 vacuum hose needs to be transferred over to the new one. And if this is in bad shape, then I recommend replacing the vacuum hose. This is the hose that plugs into the map sensor on the front of the manifold there. So you want to put that vacuum hose on there and then kind of just tuck it up and out of your way like this for now. Now that that vacuum hose has been replaced or repaired, we're going to go over here on the front right here, and if any of these vacuum lines need to be repaired or replaced, I recommend you do it right now before we install it. After that, we're going to flip the manifold over, and we're going to install the gaskets onto the manifold. The throttle body comes with it. The intake manifold gaskets here press onto the little ports on the manifold here. So you'll line up these little ports, and you'll just press it down until these lock into place. They don't hold very well. They tend to fall off, but if they do, it's not that the end of the world. We can line them up as we install it. So now we're going to lower the manifold back into position, and we're going to put the nose in first, and we're going to try to do this without knocking off our gaskets. It's very common for these to fall off. So we're going to nose it in, the tail end first at an angle. So I'm holding the gaskets on the left and right side into position while I'm pushing the manifold in, and I'm rotating it down and leveling it out as it goes in. So as I was putting it in, the gaskets fell off. So what I'm going to do is fish them back out, and then so I'm just going to feed the gaskets back in there and position them on top of the cylinder heads where the ports line up. And then when I get the manifold back in the car, then I'll line them up, and I'll show you how I do that. So right here, I'm pulling the vacuum lines from the front out of my way also, and then lowering it down. So as I was lowering this one down, the passenger side gasket fell off, and the driver's side stayed in position. So if you look down there, you can see it off centered. So I'm going to show you how to line that all up. So the way I do that is float the manifold, and then I use a screwdriver here and kind of lift the manifold up, and then you can stick the screwdriver down the ports and push the gasket left or right as you need to, and that'll help line up the gasket. And then once you get the gaskets lined up, then you can put the bolts through it. This is also a good time to double check that nothing was pinched or laid underneath the gasket. So now I have all the bolts started, and I'm going to run them in with my Milwaukee impact driver here. I got it set on the lowest setting, and we're just going to run them in. So you're going to run the bolts down until they touch, not torquing them down with a gun or anything, just touch until they're bottomed out. And these bolts are torqued down to only 9 foot-pounds. So I'm running these down in a crisscross pattern using the Milwaukee impact driver here, and it makes quick work of this. So I'm running it all down in this crisscross pattern, so working left, right, front to back. So now I have my torque wrench set to 9 foot-pounds. It's very low torque on this, and you're going to start in the middle, and you're going to torque the one bolt, and then you're going to move across, just basically in the same pattern that you did when you were running it down with the impact gun or impact driver. So you're going to run back and forth, starting from the middle, working left, right, until all of the bolts are tightened. Now that the manifold is torqued back down, we can go ahead and start mounting the vacuum lines. So the vacuum hose coming off the manifold here plugs into the map sensor, so you need to route it into the best position, and then plug it into the map sensor. And then the vacuum line that came across the manifold right here, we need to plug that into the plastic port down here. So you'll fish that out, you'll install that. And then there's one more vacuum line we're going to install. You're going to need thin needle nose pliers, and then reach down in here and grab that vacuum line here. And then we're going to plug it into the little port that's right down there with the little plastic nipple on it. It's kind of hard to see. See if I can get it down there where you can see it's in between there. So you'll plug it in right there. Now that you got the map sensor plugged in, the vacuum hose coming across the manifold plugged in, and the other one below, we need to put these little plastic holders here to hold the vacuum line down. It went across the manifold here, so just little plastic clips just lay on there like that and hold the vacuum line in position. Now we're going to change out all the O-rings for the fuel injectors. I'll link up these O-rings in the description of the video. This is very important that you change these out. We're just going to pick the old ones off and put the new ones on. Then we're going to lubricate the O-rings. To lubricate them, I like to use dish soap right here. So you put a good layer of dish soap on the O-rings, and that makes them slippery enough to go into place, and then the soap will dry up and just evaporate. So once you get it lubed up, you can go ahead and position the fuel rail back into place and line up the ports on the manifold and push them in gently and level until they all seat. And then after that, we're going to start the bolts. So the 4 bolts that held the rail on. So the ports on the new manifold are not threaded, and these are self-tapping bolts. So you'll run those in until they're snug. There's no threads in the manifold at all. Just run it in until it's snug. To do that, I'm using my impact gun here to run them down until they're snug. It makes quick work of that, or you can do it by hand. Since these are self-tapping bolts, you won't get an accurate torque on them, so just run them down until they're snug. After that, we can go ahead and start removing our bungee cords and stuff that held everything out of the way. So once you get the wiring harness laid back over, you want to plug the 2 electrical connectors in the back. The one here is underneath the plastic cover here, and then the one back here on the passenger side. Go ahead and plug those 2 in. As you plug those in, you want to make sure you push the little locking tabs back down to secure them. Now that you got those 2 plugged in, before we get too carried away installing the wiring harness, we can go ahead and bolt up the throttle body. So you're going to line it where the make sure the port right here is facing upwards. and position the throttle body on the manifold, and then start the 4 bolts. These 4 bolts are self-tapping also. There's no threads on the manifold, so you'll just run these in until they're snug. So after tightening up all 4 bolts on the throttle body, you can go ahead and plug the vent line that went in here. So you just push it onto the port until it fully seats. Now we can go ahead and lower down the mass airflow sensor and snorkel here as one piece, and rotate it in and push it onto the manifold. And we can, after that, we can also plug in the vent line here. It goes to the PCV. So as you push this mass airflow sensor on, you want to make sure these tabs flare over the little hooks there and hook on there, and make sure it's secured. And there's going to be a port here on the passenger side that we don't need, and you go to the old manifold and pull the vacuum cap off of it and install it on the port, and that blocks the vacuum off. Now we can just go ahead and start laying the computer and wiring harness, everything kind of down on top of the engine, and start working our way around plugging everything in. So what I like to do is start in the back and plug in everything, and starting with the injector. So I'll lift the harness up here and I'll plug all 6 of the injectors in. So in this case, I'm working on the driver's side here, and I'm plugging in all the connectors here. And then after I get all the injectors plugged in, we can work on this little bracket here that goes on top, and you can put those bolts back in it. So I'm making sure everything in the front here is all plugged back in. The secondary air injection, the map sensor, all that stuff is plugged in here. And then this vent line, it goes underneath this plastic bracket here, or holder here. So it slides underneath and then plugs onto the port right there, onto the valve cover. So you go ahead and install that there. And then the other hard plastic line here, plug that into the vent line there, and make sure it's snapped back into places. Once you got all the bolts in there secure, you can go ahead and start all the bolts and brackets, push the computer back in, and then you make sure everything in the front here is all plugged in. So just line everything up, push it in until it all clicks into place and plugs in, including the little metal clips that held the wiring harness. And you're going to do the same process for the driver side and the passenger side. So you just plug everything in, going around. You can either start from the front and work your way back, or work from the back and work your way forward, whatever works best for you, and just plug everything back in. Now that you got everything on the front and on the coils and injectors, all that stuff all plugged back in, the next step is going to be to put the bolts that held the ground cables here in the back. You want to install these 2 bolts on the left and right side, and make sure that those ground cables are re-secured. After that, we can put these little metal brackets that went in the back here. Start those 2 bolts. Once you got those 2 bolts run in until they're tight on both left and right side, now we can install the wire loom holders here, the bolts that held the wire loom down. So you work your way from the back all the way to the front, installing all of those. Then you go on the opposite side, you'll start the bolt here, work your way around, following around until all the bolts are secure. Now that everything's secure, you can go ahead and start the engine, and what you're going to do is just double check that there's no fuel leaks from the injectors here or anything like that. You're also going to listen for vacuum leaks, and you're just going to give a good look around to make sure that everything is plugged back in, and you're happy with that. After that, we can shut the vehicle back off, and we can go ahead and reinstall the air cleaner. So we're going to make sure the air cleaner fits snugly around the mass airflow sensor. These little metal tabs here go onto these little rubber ears. They're on the valve cover here on the left and right side. And so you'll line those ears up, and then you'll push the air cleaner assembly down until it fully seats onto the mass airflow sensor here in the back, and also that it's fully seated around the PCM and on all the grommets in the front. And then there's a little clip in the back that's supposed to be there. On mine, this little rubber grommet fell off, so if any of that came off, you go ahead and re-secure that. Then we can go ahead and put the fresh air inlet here for the secondary air injection on. After that's secure, you can go ahead and put the air snorkels on the left and right side. So you just line those up on the front of the grill here. They line up with the little vents and push them on so they lock into place. And you can flex these into position, and you'll do that for the left and right side. Then you can put the top cover on. It just fits on like this and presses in until it clicks into place. The last step is going to to go inside the vehicle and clear the codes. So I will link up all the parts and tools that I used in this video in the description. I'm Brian from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos. Encourage you to subscribe. Invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.